The Big E Sports Show.
Yeah, we got it going on,
The fastest hour in sports entertainment. We don't just talk about the headlines. We bring you some of the most engaging and colorful guests each and every episode for your listening pleasure. Now, without further ado, here's your host, Elissa Walker Campbell.
Hey, we are back in a big way. Elissa Walker Campbell, I want to welcome you into the Big E Sports Show, the fastest 1 hour in sports talk. And you can now find us on multiple media platforms online. We have officially expanded our territory. Always love to connect with our audience. Check us out on Twitter or X at eRadio Sports. You can download our show on Apple Podcasts. Check us out on YouTube. Or why not send us an email, info@eradiosports.com. It is week 15 of the NFL season, and it has been a very big week in sports. He joins us each and every week. That is my executive producer, frequent contributor on Athlon Sports, and that's my guy, Craig Larson. How are you, Craig?
Hey, E, it has been a true whirlwind, has it not?
It has been a crazy week, and so I'm not even sure where we need to start off on. What is at the forefront of your mind when we talk about the landscape of sports right now?
Well, you know, it's interesting to me. What's been buried is LeBron is sitting out now. In fact, he's away completely from the Lakers, taking some quote-unquote personal time, and that would normally be dominating the sports cycle. But with the college playoff looming, the Heisman this weekend, Juan Soto getting $765 million from the Mets. The Mets even threw in and gave him a luxury suite. And then, of course, there's Uncle Bill heading to Chapel Hill. I mean, it's been crazy.
Well, Craig, Bill Belichick, he agrees to the 5-year deal to become UNC's new head coach. What was your reaction to the news, and what do you think drives him? I mean, the guy, he's not a young fella. He's 72.
Well, so that's just it, that drive component. So I would consider, and I think you would agree, John Harbaugh to be one of the more respected coaches right now in the NFL. I only raise Harbaugh's name because John Harbaugh has 168 coaching victories on his resume as Ravens head coach. That's a full 160 games behind Don Shula's mark of 328. And so in terms of what drives Belichick, I just always felt two things about Bill. One, first and foremost, when he does land an NFL job, he's going to go to a historic franchise, maybe even a charter member of the NFL, like the Chicago Bears, given that he's a historian of the game. So that was my first take or point on Bill. And then secondly, I just always thought that one day Belichick would eclipse Shula's record. Bill has 302 wins in the NFL. I just thought a few more seasons, he'll be on top Mount Olympus, but it's not going to happen. It's such a bizarre fit. It reminds me of when Jerry Tarkanian left UNLV to coach the San Antonio Spurs.
Oh, yeah.
Or Nick Saban was Dolphins head coach for 2 miserable seasons in Miami. Like, doesn't feel like a fit. We'll have to see how it plays out.
You know, it is a stunning career move, but one more quick hit. I mean, explain why teams were apprehensive on picking him up as a head coach.
I think it's a control thing because with Bill, it's Bill's way or the highway and full control of a roster from top to bottom. It's not just the head coaching, the game tactician, adjustments at halftime, getting your team prepared, having influence and input on draft day. You are front and center, and it's Bill's lineup card, so to speak, every aspect of it. And so I think that made owners a little bit leery. I mean, he got well down the road, of course, this time a year ago with Arthur and the Atlanta Falcons. I'm just still sitting here. There are so many coaches, but when you think about what would be even plausible for him to migrate to, or what would be an ideal situation, even in Dallas, right? Take that as an example. The Dallas Cowboys need a complete rebuild, reconstruct. To your point, Bill is 72 years old. The Cowboys are probably a few years away from being back into serious contention. They have to overhaul that roster. Is Jerry Jones ever going to relinquish control to Bill Belichick or anyone else? The answer, of course, is no. And so I think that's probably what led him ultimately to Chapel Hill.
Hey, good stuff, good insight. We're going to continue this conversation. Chris Myers from Fox Sports is going to be joining us. We're going to take a deep dive talking about Bill Belichick, but also his new book that is titled That Deserves a Wow, Untold Stories of Legends and Champions, Their Wins and Heartbreaks. Chris, it's great to have you on the program.
Well, thank you. It's good to talk to you. Appreciate you having me on.
Well, congratulations on your new book. We are looking forward to shining the spotlight on it, but our first order of business is let's discuss one of the biggest wow stories, and that is North Carolina's decision to hire six-time Super Bowl champion Bill Belichick, 72 years young. He joined the college ranks in a stunning career move. So what was your reaction when you heard the news?
Yeah, I mean, that does deserve a wow. I thought that he would, I thought, that he would get back into coaching and being 26 wins away from Don Shula's record of the NFL all-time winning coach, although Bill has the Super Bowl record, Bill Belichick. So, he's kind of got a different view on things since he was, I guess, ousted. That was kind of a mutual agreement, but pushed out in New England. At least that was the vibe that we got. And I called his last game as head coach of the Patriots. I know that he wanted to coach again, and I thought somebody, and I still think if he had waited a little, that somebody in the NFL would hire him. I think there's already 3 jobs that are open, and I think there'll be 3 more at least for a head coach in the NFL. And I know Atlanta had interviewed him, the Falcons, last time. So maybe he felt like, hey, maybe I'll try the college route just because he does love coaching and he does love football. I mean, he really is about that. And the college game has changed quite a bit. I mean, this is the part that I hope he's ready for this challenge with, the NIL and transfer portal and the way players can move. So maybe it is a little bit more like a professional mode. And I did hear some of his comments prior to this being announced that he would get players ready for the NFL. And so that's kind of what has happened with a lot of college players today. They don't go to college, at least some of them that want to have careers in the NFL. They don't go to have a degree. They go to play in the NFL. So this might work for Bill. I think, depending upon his staff, that he'll be successful coaching any kind of football team. I'm just surprised he didn't wait it out, and maybe he doesn't have time to wait at age 72, as you mentioned. So this is a bit of a shocker, but it'll be good for college football. We'll see how Bill plays.
It certainly will be good for college football, but I just wonder, why did this move make sense for him? Because here is someone that has dominated the NFL with 6 Super Bowl rings, has this incredible legacy, now headed to the college ranks, and this truly has got to be one of the most stunning stories of not just 2024, but going into the 2025 season.
Yeah, and I think the other side of it is, why does North Carolina, they just, Mac Brown, who had been there and had been around, was 73, and it you say it's a young man's game, but age is really just a number. You're as young as your work shows you. So maybe Bill will put together a staff that will be a little bit less in younger years than him. But I mean, this is a major story for college football and the NFL, and to see how it plays out. And I don't know this, but I wouldn't be surprised if there was some kind of clause in his contract that he could opt out at any time for an NFL job if he so chooses. But again, at 72, he realizes that there aren't a whole lot of years left with him coaching. I mean, so maybe he just didn't want to sit around anymore. I mean, actually, his TV work was surprisingly entertaining in the short time that he's been doing that.
Chris, what do you think prevented him, though, from returning to the NFL? Was it just a power struggle, getting his way, having complete and total control over a program?
Yeah, I think that's what at least the vibe out of Atlanta was, and he says he had said going into those interviews that, hey, I can adjust, I can change. In New England, it was different. He built things over time and had to have that control. If he says that, you got to take him at his word. I think he can coach. His style of coaching is something that worked for a long time. I don't know if it'll work with today's young players or even in the NFL. I mean, he's only removed a year or so, but he hadn't been having success in New England since Tom Brady left. And so that's part of the question I think that people were asking, like, well, how much of that was having Tom Brady and how much of that was Bill Belichick?
Chris Myers, our very special guest, Fox Sports, the title of his new book that has just been released. It is titled That Deserves a Wow, Untold Stories of Legends and Champions, Their Wins and Heartbreaks. The foreword is provided by Bill Murray. And so what was the inspiration to write this book?
Well, I was approached by HarperCollins. They had looked back over some of the moments after a decade at ESPN and 20 plus years at Fox Sports of not just covering Super Bowls and World Series and things like that, college football and NASCAR races, but events that in a few spots they were great victories, but other things happened beyond sports. You're at a World Series and an earthquake happens, and you're not just there. You're there. You're covering it. You have to turn into a news reporter, and the story is about what's happening then, and not the teams or the score. You're at the Summer Olympics in Atlanta, and a bomb goes off, and you're the only one that's live through the night reporting on, are there more bombs? Is this terrorism? Then the Daytona 500, and Dale Earnhardt at the time, the face of the sport in terms of a great champion, he in the Great American Race crashes and dies in the race, and how you bring that to an audience and report that. So those are some of the moments that were kind of bigger than sports. And then there's some of the fun wow moments of Tom Brady's great comeback in the Super Bowl and being there to interview him live right after for the Super Bowl audience of over 100 million, and also being there for a college football player who in a major upset has a wedding proposal live right after, when it wasn't as trendy as it has become. And so there's a lot of that people have asked me. The interview with O.J. Simpson, almost getting beat up by Mike Tyson. So these are stories people would want me to tell, and they said, if you put all this in a book, we think people would find it interesting because it's more than just sports. There's a lot more to it, and we'd be interested in your view of what you think in those spots. What else are we not seeing or heard, or what else do we not hear in the reporting? So that I kept notes, and then I was able to help someone research and kind of ghostwrite the framing of it, because I was telling it from some of my point of view, and I didn't want the book to be about me, but through my eyes, through the lens of sports, how sports really reflects a lot of our lives.
Well, and Chris, you actually share the challenges of interviewing a legendary coach. We were just talking about him, Bill Belichick, and also Don Shula. So perhaps take some time to share some of your interactions with legendary coach.
Yeah, and a couple other coaches along the way. But Bill Belichick, there were a difficult spot where he had the chance. Don Shula has the only perfect team, his Dolphins in the 70s, to go through a season, win a Super Bowl without a loss. And Bill Belichick had a chance to top that with his Patriot team, however, lost to the Giants in the Super Bowl. And I happened to be working that sideline for Fox, and had to, after that defeat, had to interview him. And they're kind of required to come out and at least do an interview. And you could tell he really didn't want to do it. It had to be devastating because they actually had a chance to win that game and have that perfection. But eventually he did. And people thought when that interview aired that he was rude. And to me, as I write in the book, it just more was about, you have to respect when you interview people in victory or defeat, the sensitivity of the moment and how they're handling things. He just struck me as someone who just that year was not used to losing and almost couldn't believe it, couldn't accept it. So he was more stunned than I think he was rude. But when I called his last game as a Patriot head coach, when we met beforehand, he was, and this maybe led to what you were talking about, him becoming a head coach in college, that he really felt, it sounded like a different guy, almost relieved and a little looser, telling stories about our dads both being in the Navy, and concerts he went to, and relating to young players that didn't get headlines that he saw overachieve, and how proud he was of that. So maybe that was an inkling then. Of something that we might see now, and people, I guess, can over time become a little wiser and a little more, accepting of, hey, I really do love football, and no matter what, as long as I'm coaching, I'm circling back to your original thought as I'm going through my head of why he wants to do this. I just want to be able to enjoy this without some of the pressure that he put on himself, really, because he was a very intense and narrow focused coach, which is some of the things that made him so successful when he was in New England.
And Chris, you were on the sidelines also for the Patriots' massive comeback in Super Bowl 51 right here in Houston. They overcame that 28-3 deficit to emerge victorious. I was actually at that game, and one of the greatest comebacks in sports by Tom Brady. So what do you remember from that game, and how in the world did you get Tom Brady's attention when he was surrounded by so many people at the end of the game and just shared just that raw emotion?
Yeah, he was so exhausted. I really think he wanted a few more moments, but they wanted us to go live. And I actually lost our cameraman in the shuffle and our producer security person because because it went to overtime. More media was let down onto the field than they usually do before they set up the stage. And so as soon as it ended, the overtime, the comeback, the pouring on the field, that made that part difficult. But he was gracious about when I did get to him with an overhead camera for hey, Tom, just, we're live, let's go. And he rolled with it. And there's another guy who's turned into a broadcaster. But through the game, what I did notice, and I didn't feel, going in, I was like, okay, the Patriots could win this game. And then they're down 28-3. And on that sideline, I really couldn't sense the comeback. But if you watch the players and their body language, they felt that if they just did more of what they normally do, that it would cause the other team to, I wouldn't say cave, but to maybe conform to Patriot success, so to speak, as they have got so used to. And that's kind of what happens. I don't know if intimidation, certainly we use the word momentum, but I felt that there. I felt like, boy, I'm looking at the clock of the score, and I'm like, what are they going to do to pull this out? And of course, they did their part, and then Atlanta had a few miscues, but those were part of things that were forced by New England. They made that happen. They put that pressure on the opposition, even though they were trailing in the game, and at times it felt like the Patriots actually had the lead. The way the Falcons responded, so it was a fascinating observation in human behavior to be on that sideline and have to interview Belichick at the half, and he wasn't very happy, but then Brady at the end, where he was ecstatic.
Mm-hmm. Well, we've got you on the program. We definitely want you to weigh in on your interview with O.J. Simpson. What was that conversation like? And I can only imagine the nerves that you were feeling leading up to it. And that was a live interview, correct?
Yes, it was live. And O.J. Simpson wanted to make sure that it was live. That was the only really condition other than I couldn't ask about his children. It was the first live interview after both of his trials, the wrongful death and the double murder trial, of course, that we all watched. I mean, this trial of the century. But he had turned down Barbara Walters because she would only tape the interview, and he didn't want anybody to tape it. He thought they could edit it to make him look, I don't know, more guilty if that's the way he viewed it. But my perception was he wanted to come on the show because he thought I was fair interviewing athletes, but things have changed here. I wasn't going to talk sports with him. I had to talk about what we all saw and wanted to do. Some people thought I shouldn't do the interview. Even one of his own attorneys, a representative, said I wouldn't do it. I said, well, you defended him. And he said, well, yeah, but anything associated with him is negative. But I did it anyway because I felt it was important to show the audience. And I had my own opinions after having some research and access to research with detectives and lawyers and some documentation and photos that even the jury didn't get to see. But I wanted to make sure I wasn't the prosecutor or judge. I would just ask the questions that we all would have wanted asked had he taken the stand in that double murder trial. And so that's what I tried to do. Are you capable of killing? Proof that you're searching for the real killers. And he couldn't produce any of that. He sidestepped a lot of things. Ultimately, I think when people saw it, and it was very highly rated, they were able to judge for themselves and were further convinced that he did do it, and not that he was found not guilty through or that they couldn't prove his guilt through the actual trial.
Oh, Chris, it was a lengthy interview and certainly compelling to watch, but is there anything as you reflect on that you perhaps wish that you would have done differently or perhaps that you would have asked him?
Yeah, I would. Well, I think, I had a lot of notes and quotes from other people and him and documentation handy. And he did try. And it's funny, Bill Murray actually recommended a book for me to read before doing this interview about I think the title was How to Speak to Your Children So They'll Listen and How to Listen So Your Children Will Speak to You. Something like that. The book's been a while. But anyway, that was helpful because he said, people have warned me that O.J. can spin a story. Nobody knows the case like he does. Mm-hmm. So the only thing maybe, and it was supposed to be 30 minutes, it ended up being like 45 or almost an hour, 50 minutes of live TV. So we tried to, which was a great move on the part of ESPN at the time to just go with it and support that because it was so highly viewed and people were so interested in it. Maybe just if I'd come out, and said, surprised him with a shock, hey, did you do it, kind of a thing. But I didn't expect him to actually confess. But I did want to ask the questions that would expose some of the things that showed his guilt and that he was trying to cover up.
Chris Myers, our special guest from Fox Sports. The title of his new book is That Deserves a Wow. And you just mentioned Bill Murray. You have a very special relationship with him, and he did provide the foreword. What did he share? And pull back the curtain. I mean, tell us a little bit about your relationship. Do you guys spend a lot of time on the golf course?
Yeah, well, not a lot, just a little here or there. But he's fun he's just fun to be around. And obviously you could read the foreword, what he put in there. And I asked him to do it because we've known each other for, almost 3 decades. And our, we met at the ESPYs back in the early 90s. And just kind of hit it off. Obviously, I'm a big fan of comedy, and he's a big fan of sports, and we've made careers out of those things. But we come from big families, and we, just kind of connected and got to know his brothers a little, and met my family, and been very supportive in a lot of ways. And so, it's a unique friendship, and he's a very obviously famous and popular guy. But one of the things I learned in doing interviews was, and I learned this at, my first interview as a teenager when I was assigned to interview Muhammad Ali at 16 doing radio in Miami, that, I always treat a famous person like a regular guy and a regular guy like a famous person. And that way you're not intimidated and you don't overlook anybody and they feel comfortable. And that's kind of the way I've kind of approached most things. And I think that helped with our connection through the years. But he's the kind of guy, as you can tell, watching him on TV, he's got another side. And that's what's one of the things in the book. People like Charles Barkley and Bill Murray, others that in the sports world, I want you to see another side of them that you think from what you've seen on TV or read about. But you'll learn. Hopefully, you'll learn a little more about him. He's the kind of guy you'd want to hang out with, even if he wasn't famous.
Chris, you have interviewed some of the biggest names in sports. You really understand the art of an interview. Talk to us about how do you establish trust when you're interviewing somebody and you are trying to ask a difficult question?
Yeah, that's a good point about the trust, because I think, and you can gain a lot of that by having people having seen your work, right? If they've watched you do interviews. Mm-hmm. I was influenced by a couple of different people, and not necessarily in the sports world. I watched a lot of those talk interviews. And Johnny Carson, as a kid growing up, who's someone I mentioned in the book, later got to meet him. He had that middle America reach for everybody. But in an interview, he knew, and he could interview whether it was some superstar celebrity or somebody that just had some unusual habit that was in a small town that he wanted to have on the show to talk about what they were cooking or what their trick was. But he made him feel comfortable, and along those lines that we're okay, we're on the same. And so if people are comfortable, then I think there's trust, and then I think they reveal more. And I think you can ask what you need to ask, but I think you need to do it respectfully and understand their situation. And if you asked and they didn't want to answer, or they gave you a separate answer, or they just said, no, I really can't comment, or that's too personal for you, then you have to move on. But at least you did your part. So I think certainly you prepare, but I think making it a little more conversational and, again, treating it a kind of on equal footing, that helps build trust if, again, people haven't seen you before. Larry King is also another person that from his old radio days. And it was a different style of interviewer. He was more straightforward, the who, what, when, where. But he did listen. And that's the most important thing after a question or after your preparation with the person, and comfort and trust, is you listen, because I often found you get the best answer after the most revealing answer after a follow-up to a question, even if it's about the same topic or the same issue.
Chris Myers has been our very special guest. Fox Sports, the title of his new book is That Deserves a Wow, Untold Stories of Legends and Champions, Their Wins and Heartbreaks. And again, as I mentioned earlier, the foreword is written by Bill Murray. Where can all of our viewers, listeners, where can they go and pick up a copy of your new book?
Barnes & Noble, I think it's also at Target and Walmart and wherever, in any bookstore, usually you can ask for it, or HarperCollins, as you said, the publisher. Just the easiest thing, Amazon, or going online, you could order it. There's also the audiobook, which I was able to record in my own voice telling the story. And at points going, after you write it, going back over it, you're like, wow, did I really write that? Yeah, they're like, now you got to say it. So that you could expand a little more on the audiobooks, too. There's a little more to that as much as I could enhance within the framework of the book. But I really enjoyed putting it together. And I hope people are, and there's some tragedy and triumph here. I mean, people will find a way to relate to this, but I hope they're moved by it. I hope they're inspired more than anything by it. And I think because it is a great American experience, I think, growing up in this country with what, if you have a passion with what you can do and people that help you along the way. It's why I dedicate it to all the people I've worked with and for, because you don't do it alone. But I think people will enjoy it. And it's certainly, if you're in this business, I think it's something I've been asked to speak at some and colleges and sports and media classes about the business in that regard of covering live events and interviews. I think it would be very helpful for people. And if there's a sports fan in your family, this is for them.
We are in Week 15 of the NFL. This is my final question. What game will you be covering this weekend, and what particular matchup will you especially have your eye on?
Well, let's see. Looking at Sunday, the Bills-Lions game, which could be a Super Bowl preview, and I picked the Lions at the beginning of the year. I'm actually at the other end of the spectrum calling the Jets game, which is a fascinating story in the sense that they're one of the teams that have already fired their head coach and their general manager. And the question is, will Aaron Rodgers return next year? Will he still be a Jet? Something that's been out there at age 41. But as far as, that's the Bills-Lions is the game. I mean, I think you got to look at Kansas City with all their 15 straight one-score wins, which is amazing when you go back trying to three-peat and still maybe the team to beat until somebody takes the crown as a Super Bowl champ. But I think Buffalo could supplant them in the AFC, and I think the Lions, even with some of their injuries on defense, I still think they're going to make it to the Super Bowl. So this, to me, is a Super Bowl preview.
Yeah, he is an Emmy award-winning broadcaster and providing a front row seat to some of the most memorable moments in sports history. His new book that has just been released, it is titled That Deserves a Wow, Untold Stories of Legends and Champions, Their Wins and Their Heartbreaks. Always a true pleasure when we have the opportunity to catch up with Chris Myers from Fox Sports. Thank you, Chris. Congratulations. And we look forward to talking to you in 2025.
Yeah, thank you very much. And have a great holiday if we don't talk beforehand. But take care.
Absolutely. You bet. Stick around. Much more coming your way on the Big E Sports Show.